Okay, welcome everybody. Please find your seats. We need to get started because we got lots to cover today. We've got a big morning. So good morning. Thank you for attending Policy Day. It's great to see you all here. Some housekeeping items before we get started. Hopefully you notice that the washrooms are at the back on either side, just outside these doors. And hopefully you're sitting at the table that matches the number on your name tag. Thank you very much to the staff for helping organize all of the day and for all of you for coming. This morning is an opportunity for you to discuss the future of our organization. The board has set a high-level goal for the industry, but the details for how to achieve it are still in development. So thank you for coming today and for the great ideas I am sure you all come up with during this session. Art Alblas, Chair of OSF, is going to kick off the presentation portion of the morning by providing a background to this morning's discussions. So welcome, Art. Oh.
Well, you can move them along. Well, good morning. Thanks very much, Aaron. I got it really tight around here. Good thing I can't see Steve over there, hiding behind the post. Don't throw any balls at me or anything. Yeah. Anyways, thank you all for coming to our Policy Day. Our work will impact where our sheep industry will grow and thrive in the years to come. As Aaron mentioned, I will give a background to assist you in your discussions this morning. The board met in July to focus our strategic plan, Building Strength for a Better Future. Our objective was to set realistic goals for our membership. The board completed an extensive SWOT analysis where we focused on our internal strengths and weaknesses and our external opportunities and threats. We also received an in-depth presentation from Delma Kennedy from AMAFA on the state of the sheep industry. The presentation offered key facts that ushered our discussions and led us to the goal we have set to guide our organization for the next 15 years. I will take you through the highlights of Delma's presentation with some commentary from the board discussions that came after her presentation. Interestingly, after receiving a better understanding of the current sheep situation, we broke into two groups to discuss the future of our industry, each led by our vice chairs, Ken and Karen. Both groups came back with the same recommendation for a goal. The Sheep Business Plan for Ontario has a title. But more on that later. Let's review the key information. Starting at the beginning, here is a distribution of the sheep production around the world. As you can see, China is at the top of the list with double the number of sheep found in Australia and New Zealand combined. Canada ranks 84th with a total sheep inventory as of January 2023 of approximately 850,000 sheep. So to put that in perspective, in Canada, our cattle and calves are about 11.3 million, and our hog inventory is about 13.9 million. But all are declining. However, when you look at the amount of lamb traded globally, most countries are producing for their own consumption, and 2/3 of the lamb traded globally originates in Australia and New Zealand. Also of note on this slide, 32% of global production is consumed in China. Shifting demand due to China's pork supply issues affected by the African swine flu have increased the demand for lamb, creating global pressures. Majority of China's imports are from New Zealand, followed by Australia, and recently granted access to more lamb meat from Australia was actually increased their export into China. Uruguay and Chile also export to China, and Madagascar recently was approved as a supplier. Chinese consumers purchase all weights and grades, not just the premium cuts, so suppliers can sell entire carcasses. Our board is concerned that this level of consumption relying on the exports of two main sheep-producing nations is potentially unsustainable. It will also help advance our domestic lamb industry. Our next slide compares Canada's import volumes to that of other countries. There are a lot of countries lined up ahead of us. Canada imported approximately 22,000 tons of lamb and 4,000 tons of mutton in 2023, basically mainly from Australia. It will be interesting to watch the U.S. imports, which the orange bar to the right of China shows as they may be impacted by global trade tensions and tariffs. And speaking of China, here are the projections for Chinese protein consumption out to 2028. As you can see in this graph, sheep meat is expected to stay steady or gradually rise. Lamb protein is considered a high-quality protein. Some analysts suggest it will be growing faster. That will drive both increased domestic production and a rise in lamb imports due to the decreasing Chinese self-sufficiency rate for lamb. When it comes to Australian exports, the slide tells a different story. The straight volume export numbers on a previous slide, here you can see the comparison between volume and price. The graph is prior to the tariffs, but you can see the U.S. pays significantly more than China for Australian lamb. Canada is also a high-value market for Australian lamb. This could be good news because as demand from China rises, our higher price paid for their premium product will ensure we have a continuity of supply, at least in the short term. However, over the long term, the national sheep flock decline in New Zealand and the stagnation in Australia is concerning when our market relies on their production so heavily. Both countries have done a lot of work in genetics and are making fast genetic improvements, so you can see that although the number of sheep declined in New Zealand, the slaughter has remained steady. The major driver in changing genetics in New Zealand and Australia has been the focus change from primarily wool-producing breeds to larger proportion of meat-producing sheep, and improving lambing rate and carcass quality, as well in the merino and the breed. In New Zealand, average lamb weaning percentages have increased from 101% in 1991 to 133% in 2021. Lamb carcass weights have increased from 13.9 in 1990 to 19 kilo in 2020. Some processors have capped the carcass weight for about the past 10 years to service their primary markets. In Australia, as they have developed their sheep meat export market, average carcass weights have increased dramatically. Their average carcass weights are between 25 and 26 kilo, significantly heavier than the 23.1 kilo reported for Canada. Our next slide shows where Canada sits on the consumption scale. Compared to other lamb-eating countries, we are below the world average of 1.8 kilo, sitting at just about a kilo of sheep meat consumed per capita. However, as more people immigrate to Canada from countries in the Middle East and North Africa, we are seeing the annual increase in demand for our lamb of over 3%, and Ontario's consumption per person is growing. We must find an avenue to capitalize on this domestic growth with lamb raised right here in Canada. Now we'll focus on Canada and Ontario. With the next three slides, here you'll see that the Canadian sheep flock had 587,000 head for used rams and replacements. I like to look at the breeding stock numbers to avoid fluctuation with market lambs included. As you can see, the breeding flock is steadily reducing in Canada. Looking back to the late 1990s across Canada, saw a rise in sheep numbers due to increased demand for sheep meat, government support programs, new and improved genetics that brought significant productivity gains. The number of sheep and lambs in Canada increased 46% from 1996 to 2001 to almost 1.3 million head. Ontario surpassed Alberta as the province with the most sheep. So what do you think happened in 2003? Any guesses? Yep, we had the BSE crisis that hit in Canada with the Canadian cow out west, right? And that really shut down international borders with restricted exports and caused a dramatic price drop. Of course, BSE is a disease in cattle, but it in fact affected all ruminant animals like sheep and leading to major financial losses for sheep producers. So over the next number of years, there was a lot of farmers exited the business. Lamb prices in Ontario at that time ranged, and some might remember, in that sub 80 cents a pound range during that period. Our next slide shows the Ontario flock has followed a similar trend as the Canadian flock, reduced significantly following the issues that began in 2003, but it started to find a resurgence in 2010 due to very positive market signals, a sharp decline in lamb imports, and improved export market. Growing to 227,900 in 2011, it has declined to 193,000 in 2024. The steady decline is following a national trend. Market lamb numbers remain stable even as the breeding flock shrinks, showing better productivity performance. We are also making genetic progress in our province. On our next slide illustrates our population increase in relation to our production of lamb. As you can see, demand does not always keep up with supply, as seen where the bars do not meet the population line. That's assuming that demand is 1 kilo per person. They should touch. This indicates a reduction in our market presence with an aim to prevent consumers from seeking alternative sources of animal protein, as Ontario's population growth of over 1 million people from 2022 to 2024, with many immigrants coming with a preference for lamb protein in their diet. So let's take a look at the key takeaways from this snapshot and from our sheep industry and some of the discussion that we had at our board summit. Canadian consumers rely on Australian and New Zealand imports. Their production volume allows Canada's buyers to access large quantity at consistent product quality. Australia and New Zealand numbers are not increasing, and slaughter numbers are steadily but not growing. Chinese demand is increasing. Canadian consumer demand for lamb is not always met. Canadian producers must increase lamb production if we want to consistently meet domestic demand. After reviewing the data, the Ontario Sheep Farmers Board has set a new growth goal for the next 15 years to fulfill 50% of our domestic market demand by 2040. So how are we going to get there? Well, there's 1.3 billion sheep produced in the world. Canada is 84th in the world, and less than 1 million sheep, or in other words, 0.4% of the market. In Canada, Ontario sheep farmers represent only 5% of all farmers. If we continue to divide ourselves into smaller categories, we will quickly make ourselves irrelevant. We have a huge potential. Let's focus on capitalizing on this opportunity. The market for lamb is growing at a rate of 3%, possibly up to 5% per year, the largest market opportunity in the red meat sector here in Canada. Our processors are committing to the industry. Potentially 2 new federally inspected plants will be operational by 2026. The only way to ensure they have quality product they need to fulfill the growing demand for lamb is to work together as an industry. This is a big goal. Too big to discuss everything today, but this morning we're going to focus on the marketing aspect of this goal. We'll hear from our speakers who will share their insights, give you food for thought, and when it comes to the opportunities and challenges facing our industry from a marketing perspective, then we will turn the floor to you. The board looks forward to your ideas and your guidance. We have a title for our business plan: fulfill 50% of our lamb domestic market demand by 2040. The pages are blank. Let's write the plan together, beginning today with marketing strategies that will help drive us forward, leading with vision. Thank you.
All right. So, thank you, Art. It's a great way to begin the day. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Crystal Mackay to facilitate our session this morning. Inspiring growth in agri-food from barns to boardrooms. Crystal has a rich background in agriculture that started with her family farm and grew to CEO level roles. She worked for She worked with farmers throughout her career and delivered over 1,000 presentations and 500 workshops just like today's. Crystal has an impressive track record for collaborating and connecting across North America's food system. She created many award-winning farm-to-fork efforts, including starting 2 nonprofit organizations, Farm and Food Care and the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, and now her own company, Loft 32, in 2019. Mackay has been recognized for her contributions to agriculture, food, and communications on many levels, with the University of Guelph Medal of Achievement, named Most Influential Woman in Canadian Agriculture, and the CAMA Lifetime Achievement Award. We were joking about that earlier. It's like, you still got a lot of lifetime left. Crystal loves to cheer on her 2 teenagers in life and in sports, and I know this from experience playing against and with Crystal. She plays hockey whenever she gets the chance. So thank you so much, Crystal. I'm going to hand things over to you. I'm going to give you this, because I don't want that anymore.
Beautiful. Bruce, are you going to put mine up? I'm just going to take this. Don't think I can't see you over there, Colleen. The people on this side of the pillar. This room's a little challenging this morning, but we're going to work around it. I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. I haven't worked too directly with sheep too much. I mostly grew up with cattle, but my brother did sell a heifer once and buy 10 ewes, which was a total disaster. We brought lambs in the house, and they do not have a will to live. So, they're kind of existential. Well, it was a good life, and it's over. A calf will fight a little bit more. So kudos to all of you. I have so much respect for all of you and what you do. I'm really excited to be with you this morning and lead some discussion, lead your good thinking on where we go from here. We've got this great goal that we're working on. And so today I'm going to walk you through a little bit about my thoughts on strategy this morning, just a couple of things to put on as a filter, because you've got some amazing experts in the room and some people that are going to share their thoughts on the panel. So I want to just share my thoughts on strategy. How many people here love strategy and working on goals? 1, yes, 2, there's Sarah. Hi, I see you. Okay, lots of people dread it. Like they're like, oh, strategy, it's just one down from policy. So today I want you to change your thinking on strategy, that this is a fun road trip that we're going to take together, okay? So we're going to hop in this vehicle that we are building ourselves, super fun, right? And we're going to go on this road trip together because you are in a very exciting industry with so much growth potential. I can tell you, I work with farm groups of all shapes, sizes, and varieties. Many of them are fighting to maintain a status quo market. And let's use our dairy friends as an example. Millions of dollars to just try to keep a status quo consumption. You are in the opposite place where you're underfilling a market that's growing. What? This is exciting times for you, right? So let's think of it as a road trip that we're going to take together. The strategy is our map, right? Where we want to go. This is not built in cement. Just like a good road trip. You ever play the left-right game on a Sunday? It's like, hey, where do you want to go? Let's turn left. It's a good old road trip game I do with my kids sometimes. You end up getting an ice cream in some random location. It's fun. So you can take different turns. You can go back roads. You can go 401. You can get there in different directions. So today, as fellow road trippers with me, we are going to brainstorm a bunch of ideas, a bunch of ways to get where we need to go together. Does that make sense? And it's you're building the map. This is an exciting time for you. Now, when we look at strategy, this is the part that people that hate strategy, usually you go through all of these types of pieces. You start with your big vision, you work through your mission, your values, your objectives, your priorities, and then below the line is staff responsibilities, business planning, and then your budget, which I say is your gas money. You can have really grandiose ideas of driving across the country, but if you only have a smart car or a bicycle, okay, you can still do it, but it's a little harder, right, if you don't have gas money. So budget fuels all of it. But for today, we're going to focus on goals, because a lot of that other heavy lifting has been done. And we have a morning together, not a couple of days. So we're going to focus our effort on this section on the goals. This 50% of the domestic market demand by 2040. 2040 sounds like a long time away, but just think about how long ago was Y2K. Remember Y2K, how crazy we all were? Like, ooh, what's going to happen? You know, like, is my microwave going to work? I don't know. Like, it's crazy time, right? Remember Y2K? That seems like a long time ago, wasn't it? But also a minute. You know, that weird, like a long time, but also a minute ago. Same thing with 2040. It seems like a long time away, but it's not that far. So to think about a baby born today would be in grade 10 by the time you hit your goal, right? Your kids in high school will be 40 by 2040. It's not that long. So it's long, but it's not too long. It's not crazy long, right? So while we're listening to the panel this morning, you've got some great experts coming up here sharing some thoughts. I want your brain to be calculating what you can take from what you just heard from Art, what you're going to hear from the panelists, and we're going to apply that to build your map, okay? So while you're listening to the panel, think about how we're going to get to this goal, what we are going to do. And I want you to think of 3 words, and the 2 of them are easier than the third. What are we going to start doing? What are we going to continue doing? And the hard one, what are we going to stop doing? We hate stop doing. We love adding new things. We hate stopping old things. We're very attached to doing things that we love, and it's very, very hard to stop doing things. So while you're listening to the panel, I want you to have that mindset of what can I take from this insight that I'm hearing and apply it to building our map of how we're going to reach this big, lofty goal. Okay? So that's all I'm going to say to frame it up. I'm going to turn it over to Erin. She's going to introduce the panel, and we're going to hear from some experts. But keep your thinking caps on, because once this is not a spectator sport, you have to play the game. So once we get through listening to our panel experts, then it's going to be back to you, and I'll be back on here annoying you with lots of questions and good things to help build our map together. So thank you. Excited to work with you, and I'll turn it back over to Erin. You want to just, no, okay, you want to do this? There we go.
Thanks, Crystal. So we actually have 3 panelists this morning who are going to speak to us about different aspects of marketing just to get thinking along certain lines. And so we're going to start with Christian Baudry from our Quebec counterparts. I'm not going to say LAOC. That's, sorry, Christian. I won't attempt it. So, a little bit about Christian. He and his partner, Marie-France, and their children run their family flock of 900 registered Rideau Arcot sheep just outside of Granby, Quebec, which is 45 minutes from Montreal. And the entire flock is purebred and registered with all the animals enrolled in the Genovis Genetic Improvement Program. And Christian is first vice chair of LAOC. So if we could have Christian's presentation, please. Do you want the podium, or do you want to float? How do you want to?
Podium, I guess.
There you go.
It would be less stressful.
Well, it is going to get stressful here because I don't know how to do this without breaking the plastic thing. Test, test. Yep, it's still working. Haven't broken it.
Thank you very much. It's a little bit stressful for me to be here today. I was not expecting a crowd like this. And she put the bar pretty high, presenting me as an expert. I will try to meet the expectation you put in me and faith on it. I'm going to present to you what we did in the province since 2007 in terms of marketing lamb, grading lamb, and supply lamb to the market evenly throughout the year. That's the main target. Clicker. Where's the clicker? Like this. The other side. So the mission we want to do is to market those animal centralized payment supply market to the slaughterhouse as needed. If they need it on Tuesday, they're going to have them ship on Tuesday and all that kind of stuff we do. We negotiate price. We work on the price negotiation on schedule following the year, so price goes up and down throughout the year, depend on the demand and the season and Easter and all that kind of stuff. And that brings fairness, transparency, and people know what's going on and they know ahead of time what's cooking. So we started in 2007, and from 2007 to 2010, it was kind of training camp for everyone. So we set bar, and it was a learning curve for everyone involved in that strategy. So we had to start the grid, the way we're going to do that. So it takes time, and we need to provide feedback at the grower level to see if it's work or not before moving full throttle on that. So the grid of classification is based on the fat and the quality of the carcass. So it's grading on its good muscles, good loin, good shank, and all that kind of stuff, shoulder and everything. So that's mainly the first thing. So when the lamb are killed and they are in freezer, the guys go inside and grade the carcass as they hang up on the hook. That's just an example of carcass. It was a female. The fat and the yield, it was 46. So we have all that kind of information that came along. And the carcass classification, it's a visual assessment doing by the guys that is the freezer. Is it a good shoulder or not a good shoulder? It's up to him, but I guess when you do a couple of hundred a day, I think you start to be good at the end of the week. I don't think you need many years to figure out which one is a good one and which it's not a good one. So we give a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cut on the carcass, and you will see later where it goes. He also measured the fat. The fat has been measured a specific place. It is measured at the 12 ribs, 11 centimeters below the back line. So it's very specific. Every lamb has been measured at the same place every time with the same tool. Over the year, we improved the tool. So the bigger one is the one we use right now. It was easier, a little bit bigger for the guys in the cooler to see the reading and doing the reading of the fat. So here's the first grid we came at the left side. This is the first grid we came in 07, 08. So 1 or 2 is the carcass we don't want. They're lean, there are no muscle, there's no meat onto it. So the processor, the buyer don't want those carcass. And that's why you get penalized if you ship those carcass. And the carcass we want, it's a carcass ranging from 20 to 24, 25 kilos carcass, which is 45 to 55 pounds if you want. And if you are in that spot, you got, let's say you have an animal grading 4 in conformation and 12 of fat on it, you got 103. That means you're going to have a bonus of 3% over the price, because that's what the buyers want, and you get a bonus to produce a good lamb. In the other hand, if you are not good animal being shipped, you get caught a lot. Second, it's the one we did in '08 to '10. We tweaked a little bit. We were a little bit tough on cutting off some lamb. We tweaked the grid to come with something more, I think, okay for everyone, I guess. But still, the fat, which is way below 20, 22, we don't want those fat, and buyers don't want to buy fat, they want to buy meat. That's the grid we end up with from 2010 until, I guess, 22. So almost for 12 years, we work on that grid. And we separate the grid from the sweet spot, which is between 20 and 24. And another grid for the lamb it's outside of it. So if it's big lamb or a very small lamb, you have another grid with another set of penalties and bonuses, depending on where it is. And in the middle, it's always the same chart about the quality of the carcass. So I bring an example of 2009, what was looking as a payment for a producer receiving and the information that the grower is receiving. So you have a buckle, it's the name of the animal, because every animal we are on the traceability system. So every animal has a tag, and you can read the tag and knows everything. So every tag is linked to the animals, and you have your fat, your shank, your loin, your shoulder, the average score for your carcass, the total carcass weight, the price, and the bonuses or the losses you got based on the quality of your carcass. Then you have the price. So it's pretty transparent. You get all the information you need to work. And after you receive that, you can compare yourself to the rest of the province. How you do compared to what have been shipped the week before. It's always like a week behind. So you can figure out, I'm doing a good job or I'm not. Because you cannot improve what you don't measure. That's the base. If you need to have feedback, in that way you can say, oh, okay, those lamb, they were not good, they were not well finished, okay, I need to change things. And that kind of feedback is pretty useful for growers, for people like us to change things. Do I have the right breed? Do I have the right terminal breed? Or all that kind of stuff. You can figure out what you can do to improve yourself. At that time, too, we had a cut also for AV lamb because buyer didn't want lamb higher than 26 kilos. So after that, you start to have some cuts to keep the weight of the lamb a bit lower. That was the aim, to have a consistent lamb being shipped on the slaughterhouse. That's the goal. So what it does looks like over the years, so all the fat. By doing so, we were able to keep a very steady, pretty much steady over the years. The fat didn't move much. So for buyers, that is very useful. And when we go back to negotiate price, he's happy. It's a good way to negotiate price because he knows what he's gonna get. He knows he's not buying fat, he's buying meat. And that is very useful tool to have in your toolbox when it's time to negotiate with your buyer. There's a little spike, 22-23. I'm gonna come back to you and explain what did happen with those spike. It's not a huge spike, but there's a reason for that. So that's the picture of through the years, compare on the number of head on every strat of plagia of weight. So 20, 24 kilos, that is the sweet spot. That's exactly what they want, and that's what we try to provide as much as we can. So overall, we put on the market 55,000 AV lamb a year. That's the average score. So all the lamb go through the grid. So we've been able to manage to be around 100 for all the 50,000 lamb we put through the agency and the grid system. We were able to say, okay, that's fair. The average, everyone gets at least 100% of their price of the lamb. And if you're doing a good job, it's possible to you to have bonuses. Like if you work on genetics and alimentation and all that kind of stuff, you can end up an average of 103 for your own flock at the end of the day. So that means you got 3% more money than the average of people. Just being, knowing what you're doing and work on what you have on your farm and try to improve it. Two years ago, buyers came at the table and said, okay, we need to simplify the grid. We have all the data, all the historic, and the category 1 or 2 are almost all disappear. There's no more longer on the hook anymore. People knows the system, and people that providing lamb, it's pretty steady. And buyers came and said, okay, we would like to have some heavier lamb. We want it a little bit bigger because we do cuts, and it will be better to have a bigger shank and better ribs and all that kind of stuff. So 2 years ago, we changed the grid and we increased the weight. So we were allowed to provide up to 32 kilos lamb without any penalties. Compared to before, it was cutting, remember, at 26 kilos, we got a cut. So we removed that because the buyer wants it. He said, beware, they're going to be heavy. That's exactly what did happen. Because it didn't take time to figure that bring 1 or 2 kilos more on the lamb brings a lot of money back very fast. But it brings a little bit more fat into it. So right away, and the good thing of our system, it's because we knew right away what did happen. Within a year, the fat increased by 1 millimeters, pretty fast. But the weight increase also, but 14, it's not crazy. It's not bad, 14 millimeters, you are still in the sweet spot in terms of, for the buyers, it's not crazy. But just see how, when you collect information, what you can get from the marketplace right away. So as soon as we did that, you see the orange bar, which has always been the big one, shrink, and the green bar increase a lot, and the blue bar increase. So, and this fall, we're still finishing our negotiation with the guys and said, okay, let's go back a little bit. The market is not willing that big lamb too much. There's room for big lamb, but not that many big lambs. So now we will tweak again our grids. Price will go down, so we will go down to 28 kilos, 77 kilos, where the cuts will start to be, not 32 like it was. But I think it's going to be useful for everybody because we always need to supply what the markets want. We cannot push lamb. We need to supply lamb. It's a different thinking. That's the fat we end up. I told you about the spike of fat we have in 23 and 22, 23. That's a challenge. People that have people working, it's a challenge. For the past 15 years, I think we had almost the same guys in the slaughterhouse doing the grids. Then the pandemic arrived, and seems that everything disappeared. Seems that there's no people work anymore, and then it start to have rollover and people change and stuff like that. So we had in 23 a new at the big slaughterhouse, the big one. The guys has changed. And you remember the knife, they have a rope and they put the rope and the knife on their neck, but the rope break and you fix it, but the rope was a little bit shorter. So when he was doing the reading like this, he was always a little bit short on his rope, and the quality of reading start to move, and right away figure out, ooh, something's wrong, what's going on? It's every week. The fat was bigger and bigger. I said, what the hell's going on? Then we send back the auditor, because we have someone that is in charge of that, and said, hey, something's wrong. Go there and check. And he figured that out right away. He said, oh, you're not reading properly. So those things never happened before, because it was almost the same people for 15 years doing that. But seems the pandemic, man, rolling over in the slaughterhouse. Sometimes we don't have grader in the same slaughterhouse, so it creates more difficulties. We try to improve that kind of issue, but it's an issue. Turnover, I talked about that. And also, there's a lot of slaughterhouse, the small one, that are coming in written on paper or on Excel sheet, and it's a lot of data transcription. So it's manpower, I would say, to collect all of those data. So we try to avoid that in the future. We are working on equipment that will be electronic, and everything will be electronic stuff. And we're working that stuff with the cattle guys. So they will, because they do some kind of the same thing for the cattle, for the veal mainly, and we work together to develop an equipment that will be automatically reading and grading stuff and ship electronic the data, then you just have to transfer it. So we'll try to keep the manpower away to solve that issue. Over the years, I start to know too in the business, and so I almost start with that system. And for myself and for what we're doing at the farm, I always find very useful to have that feedback from the slaughterhouse. It's always been useful for the genetics and knowing what we're doing and being able to respond to the proper market. And I'm pretty sure the market is, I think the future is bright. Hart is right. I think the demand is increasing and the supply is declining. And talking about plant moving on federal, I don't think it's by something new. It's because they have some more demand, like Loblaws always import lamb from Australia. If those little slaughterhouses want to ship to those federal. If they have their slaughterhouse to be federal, it's because I think they have problem with supplies from outside. I'm pretty sure of it. So I'm pretty sure we have a bright future coming in, but I think that system is very useful. So if you have any question, I hope. Okay.
Thank you very much. And Bill, come on up. Bill McCutcheon will be our next speaker. Bill operates a farm with 600 ewes and custom grazes cow-calf pairs. He also manages Ontario Lamb Marketing, Inc., supplying lambs to federally inspected processors. And that's what he's going to speak to us about today.
How long do I have?
15 minutes.
An hour?
An hour, yeah.
I could do it in an hour, yeah. One with the pretty sheep on it. Yeah, the pink fluffy one. There we go. That looks like a nice day, maybe a nicer day than today. So welcome everybody. I just threw a few slides together, and I have some carcass pictures just to give us a bit of point of reference about what we have and where we might be heading, and maybe where we've been. And how does this work? Maybe it has to be on. That's what I'm doing. There we go. So just a wee bit of what's happened in the past, and some of these things happened, Anita and Delma and I, when we were fresh and shiny and right out of university, worked on a few projects. And we had a live lamb grading program at one time through the Red Meat program from the mid-80s to mid-90s, where we went on farms and we identified lambs. Then what we thought were grades A1, A2, same as what they graded beef. So those were lambs that were in that right now with the stuff out of Quebec that would be at least a 3 body score on the legs, loins, and shoulders, and in that 9 to 15 millimeter range. And Anita still has the data, she tells me, from when we put that together, and that was not done on a computer. That was in the dark ages before there were computers and cell phones and internet. And we've got some results from that. We had an electronic auction at one time. The marketing agency ran an electronic auction, not for a very long time, but one fall. And Fred's smiling back there. Fred remembers that. And we were able to sell some lambs electronically, and there wasn't much technology there. It was pretty bare bones for sure, but we were able to accomplish that. And then we had some direct sales to packers through the 90s, and the marketing agency initiated that. And then after that, we had Trillium and Ontario Lamb Marketing that picked up some of that business and continued to sell straight to the packer. Maybe I turn the thing around. There we go. So what we learned from live grading? So at that time we had lots of provincial money to train people, so we trained live lamb graders and we set them out on farms, and we had the lambs tagged, and then we monitored what the price difference was through the sales on those lambs. We had two different categories of lambs. We had lambs that were 80 to 100 pounds and lambs that were 100 pounds plus, and we monitored what was going on. And I mean, the drive for that at that time is that Canada Packers in Toronto on Keele Street were bringing in 400 lambs a week from West Virginia into a system, and we thought we should capture some of that market. And if we thought we could identify them better and produce more volume, we could do that. And what we found is that those lambs were able to bring $5 to $7 more on the market, the graded lambs, compared to the average on those market weeks. So that was pretty encouraging. It was a great producer education tool. We could go on farms and identify lambs that were properly finished and group them together and get them away from the lambs that were underfinished to the lambs that were overfinished. So we were able to get producers to understand, but also buyers, that these were pre-sorted lambs and they were premium above the average run of lambs that were in the market. And then when we did the electronic market, so we sent graders out, same graders, and they assessed those lambs and we described them. We talked about how old they were, and we weighed every lamb, and we had a range, and we had an average, and we had what they were fed, and we were able to market those lambs without the buyer seeing them. This was far before a video auction. This was just a description auction. And what it allowed producers to do was put a bottom bid on those lambs. So it gave producers some control over what those lambs would sell for in this kind of a marketing system. And it wasn't perfect, for sure. We used some of the hog yards at that time to assemble lambs on. Some of them went right into Toronto and were weighed on scales there. We certainly had issues with shrink. Some buyers thought there was too much fill on lambs, and We had to address those issues, but it was certainly, we were able to describe lambs well enough that the buyers had an idea of what they were buying. And then I've talked about some of that. It entailed a bit of work, and at that time I was working in the OMAF office in Newmarket, and actually the inspector and I bought the lambs on Friday morning. And Nicky Senior would come in and tell us what he wanted to bid on the lambs. And he was always pissed because usually it took one more bid and he wasn't buying many lambs, and we caught all this shit. But at that time he got the inspector off the floor for an hour, so that was helpful, apparently. Then it kind of evolved into private companies that took over some marketing of lamb, and I think both have been relatively successful. And there were different ways or different things that we had to do. We had to term price, and we had to facilitate trucking. So I think, we've done a good job or try and get producers in areas where we can send one truck instead of 5. And try and cut some costs for producers that use this system. The big issue is that how do we balance that off-season production? Because certainly there's a lot more supply in the market in the third and fourth quarter than there is in the first and second quarter. And the second quarter is the problem, particularly with Kibani stuck in the middle of it right now, is to try and get enough lambs in that second quarter where we have not so much Ramadan. Ramadan's in the first quarter, but Easter and Kibani at the same time is quite a challenge to get enough supply in the right place at the right time. And I guess what we also realized is we can have one truck ride per lamb, and I think from an animal welfare issue, perspective, that's an important thing, is that these lambs are only getting one truck ride. So I guess overall, it's similar to the Quebec system. We got to have the right product at the right time at the right price. We need to be able to predict prices for producers so they have a bit of an idea of what they're going to get for product and what they're going to get for price. And we need to work with our processors to estimate what demand will be and how we're going to satisfy that demand on a monthly basis. And that's what we do a pretty poor job of here. And even the packing houses that I deal with have a hard time doing this. And we need to get better at that so we can try and match demand to supply. The other thing I want to talk about is price discovery, and this is a really important thing. And Steve's going to talk more about that, but I think, in my opinion, we spend way too much money per lamb on price discovery because we're trucking those lambs into a market, and we're paying commission on those lambs, and buyers are paying buyer fees. We pay insurance when those lambs are in the yard, and then we truck them all back out again. And we have shrink on those lambs and loss of quality. And in the lamb business, at least the guys I deal with, it's all about color. They kill veal at the same time, and it's all color. And if we have lambs that go off color, they're going to have a hard time merchandising that product. So I think it's unacceptable that we spend $30 per lamb, not producers alone, but collectively as an industry, to determine price on a product that's $300 or $400. It's not quite 10%, but it's way too much. And I think collectively we need to get our heads together and figure out how we're going to reduce that, because certainly our competition doesn't have those kind of costs, and it makes us somewhat uncompetitive. And there's some of our competition, right? And there's lots of it out there. They come in with lots of consistent product at a pretty good price, and it's a good job they're there, or nobody would be eating lamb. It'd be 40 or 60% smaller, not 60%. It'd be more than 100% smaller than what it is now, because we only supply 40% of that market. So we do need that product there. So I guess just going down the line, we're going to take these lambs from the feedlot, and we're going to process them efficiently and try and get them get them dressed well and make sure they're nice and clean so they have shelf life on them. And that's actually a picture of some new crop lambs. It's pretty hard to show relativity here, but this is a pretty expensive product, those milk lambs. Those lambs were $24 on the rail, a kilo. $24 a kilo on the rail before there's even a knife put on them or they're packaged. And I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before. This is a loss leader for most stores. Somebody's losing $150 a lamb to put that product on the shelf just to get more foot traffic in their stores. So it's a bit of an issue that we have. And there's some product. That's not in a slaughter plant. That happens to be on the top of my warming box in the barn, which is totally 100% sanitary. Good job. Good job it's in plastic. But White Valley's a company that operates in Quebec, that kills in Quebec, and they break product here and merchandise it. And that's just a picture out of my local store. And I must have been in a hurry because I didn't center it very well. But those are actually Western chops. So they've taken racks out of the vacuum pack and put them in chops. And you can't see the price on there maybe, but it's under $20. It's between $20 and $25. So there's only 3-4 chops in a package. So that's where they think that price point is to merchandise that product. So what about the future? I think we need to drive some cost out of the system to determine price, and we need more accurate price determination, because with all these programs, it's about being able to satisfy the packer as well as the producer, and the packers compete against each other. There's no question, and they need to have some level of comfort that they're going to be able to do that with the product they buy. And conversely, on our side, on the producer side, is that we don't really want to leave money on the table. We want to make sure that we're well rewarded for the product that we produce and fairly rewarded for it. And those things are pretty easy to say, but not so easy to do and determine. We need to be able to support these packing houses, because the one that's being built right now has an awful lot of investment, and the issue with any kind of a packing house, you have to have a certain amount of volume that goes through that to cover those fixed costs. And if you can't secure that kind of product, you certainly cannot make much profit. You won't make any profit. And so we need to work together on that thing. So we have some tools, and we're going to talk about that. This is just one of the programs I run. I mean, we just have to put some walls around what we want, similar to what they've done in Quebec. Is our spec on these lambs are 20 to 25, no pelvic and kidney fat, but the kidneys are in, no head, no pluck, yeah, and a cap of 27. And I mean, we run into the same problem here as what they do in Quebec, is that once those lambs get over 27, the cuts get some of the cuts get too big, and particularly the legs, to merchandise as a whole product without taking the shank off. And so it just, once in this particular program, once those lambs get to 27, that's the cap of the price. Like if they're 32 kilos, you get paid as if they were 27 kilo carcasses. So I'm sure some of you have seen these slides before. So this is the grading system, the same as what they have in Quebec. And these lambs here are all the same amount of GR. So what you see in difference in these carcasses is actually muscle. So they're all about 9 millimeters of fat. So we've got lambs there that the first one's a 332, so a little sharper on the shoulder. It's got adequate muscle in the leg and the loin for sure. And the next one is a straight 3 all the way through. And I mean, if we can merchandise lambs like that every week, it's a winner. For sure. Everybody thinks we should be pushing 4 scores, and that's okay to have a few 4 scores, but we can't have, we've got to have them there all the time. And it's a lot easier to produce lambs that are 333 than lambs that are 444 all the time. So the next one's a complete 4, and then we've got there's some 5 scores here as well. So you can see as you move up in score, that leg gets bigger, the loin gets wider. And this is just a chart. There's about 1,000 lambs there. It just shows you the distribution among those ranges, those weight ranges. But it also shows you the range in GR. And then there's a nice chart there that has nice linear correlation between fat and weight. and it does go up. And the big thing is the range, because if you look at those heavier lambs, we've got range all the way from 5 to 24 millimeters of fat, and that's a bit of a problem, because the average is okay at 12.5 millimeters or 13 millimeters of fat, but it's all those lambs that are over 18 that's their problem, for sure. This is just one of the programs that we run, how we calculate price. And what I've got is a 12-month rolling average on lambs that are 95 to 109, and then a 12-month rolling average on the lambs that are 110 plus. So that's right off Ontario Sheep's website. This is based on OLEX price. And what I do is I calculate a rolling 12-month price based on those two charts. I take the number off the 95 to 109s and the one off the 110s, and I add them together and divide by 2. So right now, our base price, the base 12-month price is $15.59 a kilo. So there's a lot of numbers there. This is the monthly price, and what we do on this this program is we look at what happened the month before, and we look at the base price, and we add those two numbers together and divide by 2. So if it's above the base price, then we go towards where the high price is. If it's below, then we try and support that price. So right now we're supporting price. Our monthly price right now for the month of October is $14.58. Is that what it says there? $14.58, yep, a kilo. So I have this graph to be able to look at it a little bit better, but what we try and do is even out the great big swings and have it more moderate, so you can take a little less money in the first and second quarter, but you make it up in the third and fourth quarter on those lambs. And this is hard. It's hard when you're in a rising market, because you can see that price has risen pretty good in the last 2 years, and it's really hard to keep up. Producers really like it when the price falls, because you can support price a lot better. And this is just an indexing chart, and it's pretty similar to what they use in Quebec. In fact, we looked at the Quebec chart when we put this together. So this is a post chart for one of the plants. So it's not much different than what you've seen on those other charts. So change. We need to talk about change. And usually when we want to change is when we have a terrible crisis, because we know we have to change. And I think it would be much better if we think about change when we don't have to change, and we're not under pressure to do that and under financial distress. Because in my opinion, there's not been much financial distress in the sheep business in the last 2 years, for sure. So I think it's a perfect time to look forward and see what we might be able to do with a marketing structure that might work for us. And in my opinion, where we should be heading is a carcass auction program. I think that would be a way to determine price, fair price, but it comes with a lot of legwork, and we have to be able to work with packers and get them to understand what they're going to receive, because we grade very few carcasses here, and it's when we started grading carcasses, we got the owner in the cooler, and he had to tell us what a very nice carcass looked like that wasn't too fat, and quantify that into muscle score, into GR measurements. And I think we have to go all the way back and do that with some of these packers. So anyways, that's the end of my presentation. So just a few things to think about and where we've been and where we might head to. I just have a picture of a lamb there. Great.
So now we'll welcome Steve Duff to come up and speak to us about price determination and price discovery. Steve comes to us from a dairy and beef background in Northumberland County. Steve has his master's in ag economics from the University of Guelph and joined the Ministry of Agriculture in 1997. And for 15 years, Steve was OMAFA's lead on business risk management programs such as agri-stability and crop insurance. And now, Steve is the chief economist at the Ministry of Agriculture. It's wonderful to have you. Thanks, Steve.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me out. I'm going to try to build on the previous two presentations. I appreciate being part of your policy day. I think there's a lot of interesting and challenging and reflective things for the industry to take a look at. And before I get into the stuff I want to sort of cover off specifically, you know, the previous two speakers had some really good information to think about, to contemplate. You know, Quebec's system is a mature system. Quebec's system requires a lot of hard work and years of hard work and people getting used to it, figuring out how to make it work, et cetera. And I think it's been very successful. And in particular, I think it's been successful in helping Quebec sort of direct the size of their industry, et cetera, which in a lot of ways is one of your objectives as you're talking about here, right? But it's certainly not without cost, right? And it's not without challenge. It's not without work in terms of the government, the boards, et cetera, producers. And it also relies on price discovery from the Ontario market. And that is something we're going to talk about. So I want to come back to that. The other one I think is, and this was presented in sort of the overview at the start, it was present in both of the presentations, that, you know, there is, I think, a distinction, even though we don't typically talk about it, there's a distinction between Canadian lamb and imported lamb for a variety of reasons. Yeah, we have to, and I'll talk about arbitrage and what that means, but distinguishing those things is really going to be important as part of this process to move forward, because it's the thing that helps provide the incentives which will allow you to grow the industry, not just price. And it's easy to feel good about an industry when you're at a high price level, right? So that's one of the things to keep in mind, and distinguishing that product, because it's pretty clear that that's the case. And there's a lot of research in a variety of commodities in this country, and you know, Trump's kind of brought it out, but from my perspective, if you heard me do these talks before, and in the work that we've been doing for a long time in the ministry or across Canada, many of these things are present, where Canadians would prefer a Canadian product from, not just because it's Canadian, because they see it as a higher quality, fresher, et cetera. It's just not there. And that doesn't always reflect in some of the per capita demand numbers, et cetera. So there's a bunch of commodities, in my opinion, like that. Freshwater trout in this country is a huge one. It's a massive opportunity, very similar to what you're talking about here, right? But it's that distinguishing point once there's that available product, and that plays out into a lot of things as far as data, price discovery, and that kind of thing. And so one of the most important things I think for you to think about in this discussion of visioning is that there's a difference between price determination and price discovery, right? And Bill talked about how packers compete amongst each other. They're competing amongst each other because they're understanding the factors in the marketplace that are determining the drive for overall demand, population, who that population is, the freshness of the product, the availability of the product, et cetera. That passes its way down to the producer, and the price discovery is really how we set a price. And that setting of the price can come in a variety of different forms. And when I do presentations like this, if it's to the corn or the cattle industry, the hog industry, that's one of the easier things I have to discuss, because it's driven by the US, et cetera. There's a futures market, all that kind of thing. But understanding those factors that were presented earlier, when you hear me do market outlook, especially about this industry, this idea of price determination is fundamentally different than price discovery. And that's also important. And one of the other things within that, which can also be challenging for producers or just businesses in general, from my experience, is that oftentimes what's going on in a price level or discovery mechanism doesn't always fit with what price determination tells you, right? If you're a canola producer in Western Canada, you're thinking, well, we have no market for our product, but the price hasn't dropped a whole lot. So what's that mean, right? Well, it's a storable commodity. It's a commodity that has a futures market. It's a commodity that on any given day, no canola is sold. Those are the things that a price determination then plays out in the price discovery. Your industry is a little bit different, but I want you to think about that when you go through. And so the basic sort of formula in this is that, you know, the supply of lamb in Ontario is a function of a variety of things. The price of lamb in the past, that has a bigger impact on supply in the future than today's price because of the gestation period of the ewe, right? And depending on your industry, the cycles in livestock industries, especially breeding-based ones like cattle or hogs or goats or sheep, the cycles are oftentimes driven by the length of the gestation period, right? The price of corn. So this is also an important one, which I'll talk about in a minute, but if the sector moves to more of a feeding-based industry as opposed to one where you've got the full value chain, so Bill talked about reducing costs, I agree 100%. And that can occur in a bunch of different ways, right? If you look at the cattle industry, I know sometimes people in this group don't like talking about cattle, it seems, but that's a good comparison, and it's a good idea to compare yourself to them so you can see where you could learn from them or where you don't want to do what they do, right? And that is that if you're feeding all the time, that disconnects you in the marketplace. It adds middlemen, et cetera. That can be a challenge. Seasonality obviously is a big one, both from a demand perspective and then inventory. And then in terms of demand, it's the same thing, but recognizing that lamb is unique in that normally, as an economist, when we talk about demand, we talk about substitution, right? So what is, people are buying protein and they have a bunch of different choices, right? And those prices move in and around. And that's one of the reasons, to use beef as an example, beef prices could be way higher than they currently are, as crazy as that sounds. The reason is that they have to stay in line with chicken and pork because they're two very substitutable products. But lamb is kind of over here because it's a different product for a lot of people. And for a lot of people in this country, it's not a product that substitutes with those other ones to the same degree. It might substitute with non-animal proteins more likely in some cases, right? So that's also something to build out if we want to provide incentives. And I think, and Bill mentioned this, and the other gentleman from Quebec mentioned it a little bit as well, the move to an interest in a federal packer in the lamb industry can reflect in this more so than it does now, because the grocery system in this country or in the U.S., because of its scale, because of its movement all across Canada, is taking into consideration different factors in a broader sense, okay? And that also is something to think about. So, the other side of this is that the U.S. sets the market, and this maybe isn't quite as strong with respect to lamb, and I'll come over that a little bit in a bit, why that is. But the reality is, sort of from a Canadian perspective, especially in livestock, the U.S. sets the market. And as long as we have free flow in product, prices cannot get too far out of whack. And I'll talk about that in a second. Because if you don't, product will move back and forth, right? And that's the way it is. And again, there are things like Trump, pending tariffs, transportation costs, exchange rates, that kind of stuff that play into it. But that's a big one. And so the reason I'm mentioning this is I'm going to talk about different things we could do from a price discovery point of view, and it plays into that. And similarly, in certain markets, we will arbitrage across the country as well. The price of fed cattle, for example, in Ontario can't get too far out of whack in Western Canada. Otherwise, there will be movement, right? As crazy as it sounds to move in steers west when we've done it and vice versa, it can't get too far out of whack, right? The same applies with lambs, veal. There's a bunch of other industries like that more specifically, but this idea of arbitrage is an important one. Within that, though, and this is why I mentioned earlier this distinction on lamb, is that the concept of arbitrage is most profound when you have a pure commodity. When my corn in Ontario is no different than the corn in Western Canada, right? When my cow is the same. But if you have, and again, I think there's probably a lot of similarity between the demand context for lamb in Quebec and Ontario, but certainly for Ontario and the US, there's a big difference in terms of what Canadians would want and how we can distinguish it. That is an important feature for you to think about as you go through this exercise. It's not just about what's the best way to get the best price or what's the best way to grow production. It's a combination of those things. And the work on a grid and reducing transactions costs, as Bill mentioned, and setting some kind of reasonable formula where packers can have assurance on volume and producers can feel comfortable in knowing that they're going to have a reasonable price and that they can use quality to help increase their price. Those are things that all tie into this, and in my opinion, helps distinguish you from the U.S. market, which helps protect you, but it doesn't prevent this basic concept from playing out. So you guys have seen the numbers. So again, the three key things really from the price determination side of it is we don't have enough ewes, whether it's in Ontario, whether it's across the country, or whether it's in the U.S. They're all very similar. So the left-hand graph is Canada, and the right-hand graph is the U.S. That's all you really need to think about. There aren't enough, okay? And so there's two aspects to this. How do we keep the ones we have, and how do we grow, right? Those are two very different things, right? Because the likelihood of completely growing within the people in this room or the people in your board meetings when you go out to your local area, it's not all that realistic. You're going to have to bring new people into the model to really achieve the goal you're talking about. Lamb and goats, in my opinion, are also a very unique industry with an opportunity. So this isn't really about price discovery, but I'll say it, is you have a lot of new people coming into this country who this is a primary source of protein for them, and they have experience producing these things, right? And so they're very interested. I can tell you from personal experience that I know quite a different few scenarios where I've been approached by people about, well, how would I get into this industry? So they come to me more as a farmer as opposed to a government guy. And I'm like, okay, well, and they're looking at it from the very point I'm making. That's a real opportunity, but it's not without challenges, right? We've covered off demand. Again, it's significant. So I think in the context of visioning, one of the key things is to think about how you can continue to get better data for your industry on demand, right? Aaron and the organization, they already do a lot from my perspective relative to other organizations. There's a lot of effort put into that. But I think, again, and the ministry can help with this, trying to understand this better and this distinguishing demand, I think is going to be really key to achieving this objective. And I think that's also going to help grow. And then the last point that's already been made, we import a significant amount, and obviously there's always an opportunity to displace that. That's pretty clear. So that's been covered. So getting into price discovery, this is an industry in this country that relies on auctions. And from a livestock point of view, that's historically been one of the main methods, not the only one, but the main one. And at this point in Canada, lamb and veal are really the only two that rely on auctions for sale of animals going to slaughter. So that's unique, and it's unique in the U.S. as well, okay? It's a good thing because, as Bill mentioned, while there are extra costs, those costs are a lot less than if you were selling that lamb if all lambs are sold as a feeder again, and then sold as a fed animal. You talk about adding up costs, and I think we all know what industry does that, right? That's a big one. So you're already ahead of the game in that context. But the pure reliance, for the most part, on auctions, I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, but without the auction system in Ontario, Quebec doesn't have a price to go with, right? The guys in Quebec, in my experience, are pretty smart. They would have figured something different out by now if that was the case. But the reality is that feeds that system. One of the advantages, and this was key to again, I apologize, I forgot the gentleman, your name from Quebec, sorry, sir, but one of the advantages of what Quebec was presenting and what Bill talked about is that the systems produce significant information. And with significant information, you make good decisions. But if you look at why the beef industry in this province, and I'll come back to it a little bit more, why the sheep industry, why Aaron and crew can have those great marketing reports you have, it's a function of checkoff and the auction system, the way prices are pulled. That's not there in a lot of commodities, right? So like use grains and oilseeds as an example. The Farm Market News, which all of us, many of you probably get every single day, shows the board price for corn, right? There's a lot of days where nobody gets that price, but it's the prevailing market mover, right? And then the GFO reports an average price for the month 4 months later. And that's a combination of so many things. It comes through the checkoff system, but relating those two to what I had today to think about versus what I saw down the road are two different things. The auction system and the tie to the checkoff system, especially in veal, in in the sheep industry as well as in feeder cattle, it's unbelievable how important it is. And a lot of people in the province don't understand that. So to move away from an auction system or have different models doesn't necessarily give you better information, right? Unless you have a bunch of infrastructure like Quebec has done set up around that, right? And maybe you as an individual have good info, but as a sector and as a way to grow, to bring people in, that gets challenging. And so, you know, if we talk about growth, if we tie it to either a system that has grids, a system that has more reflection of carcass grade or quality, or if you have more of a federal system. Sorry, okay, one more minute? Okay. Basically, you're going to have to move to a system where you have direct sales on contract or direct sales on a cash basis. And in the cattle system, those are generally driven by futures discovery markets that the industry uses. And generally speaking, those producers are either setting for delivery in 14 days or some future date, right? That information is not public. If you go and get rail grade prices from the Beef Farmers of Ontario, anywhere in this country, the same out west, it's a voluntary process that a few producers offer. In the United States, it's mandatory as part of their reporting, okay? That's also a fundamental difference. So moving to that model doesn't necessarily add great things. So one option from a price discovery point of view is to think about looking at the US. This idea of arbitrage, I'll do basis quickly. I'm going to try to get done as quickly as I can. But in the US, a pretty low percentage of lambs, at least for slaughter, are sold via auction. You can get daily and weekly live weight prices pretty readily available. And last week, the average price at auction was around $292 a hundredweight, and that converts to a carcass weight of $584. Again, carcass conversion is obviously tricky. That in itself is an important feature. The previous two speakers didn't talk a ton about it, but it's implicit in what they're doing. Understanding carcass weight's extremely important. Upwards of 30% of the U.S. slaughter lambs are held and owned by packers. So there's the packers buying the lambs on feed, putting them in feedlots, and they own it. So there's no price reporting on them, really. About 50% of U.S. slaughter lambs are sold direct contract using a formula, right? In cattle, corn, hogs, that formula is driven usually by the futures market. But in the U.S., it's a function of a bunch of things, a lot of times, which is more, like Bill had outlined, where we've been and a little bit of where we think we're going, which is useful, but it's still a relationship process. And if you're doing that exclusively, that can be a real challenge, and it's something to think about. But there's no reporting of that formula price data really anymore in the U.S. So our ability to look and see what formulas look like in the U.S., not there. About 20% of the lambs are sold direct to packer using a negotiated cash price. Those can be challenging negotiations, right? And so recognizing that, the weekly volume outline, there's a number of things there, providing a weekly volume, average price, et cetera, and the price that this past week was $222 on the 100, which converts roughly to $444 on the carcass. Again, those are negotiated cash, and those are, again, challenging discussions. We'll talk more about that really quickly. They also have, which is also very unique to the US, we do not have this in Canada in any of our meat industries. They also have mandatory wholesale price reporting. That can be challenging too when you have a small number of businesses. It's not fair to packers in some respects as well. It's one of the reasons why Canada doesn't have it, because we don't have as many packers as the US, not just in lambs, but other commodities. That's the wholesale value. So the gross value that same week for that average lamb carcass was $573. They assume a $77 US processing handling cost. That takes you to $496. The relationship between that wholesale price and the farm level price is important. Basis, again, quickly, I'm trying to get you guys back on track if I can, but I need to cover this. It's basically the difference between our price and the US price when you take out exchange rate. It's all the other kind of things that go on. This is the lamb basis, and this is something you'll see me in I think it's November, doing the market outlook. I talk about basis there. But there's a clear relationship between the US lamb price and the Ontario lamb price. It's not as strong as maybe in some other commodities, but it's clearly there, and the basis follows pretty closely. And we've seen a really strong basis, much higher than average, and strong means we're above them in a way that reflects a bunch of issues, local demand, supply, those kind of challenges. And so that's something to think about, because this allows us, building this average, you can do some numbers, and this is what we do in the cattle industry and other industries, is you look, well, the normal basis is plus 20 this time of year. So futures is telling me this, exchange is telling me this, I'm gonna go plus 15 if I'm the packer. I want to assume that maybe it's not gonna be as tight, and that's how those negotiations work. That's exactly how, to use that very specific example, how the negotiated price model was set in the US, okay? So that's something to think about for the future. And then this is the relationship to that cutout value. So this is the US negotiated price relative for lambs, because that's the majority of their lambs, at least in terms of what's public data, relative to that cutout value, okay? And you can see this is over the last, since 2020, that's the most time I had to get data. I can go back in time at the point. But it stays in a relatively big band. We had some issues when they had some supply issues from a packer point of view, and it's been staying in and around 1.5. That's also a way to guide it. The challenge here in Canada is we don't have that value. Packers have that individually. That's an important thing for them. It's also very competitive, and you have to respect that from their perspective. But recognizing that this relationship can also help guide our discussion. So to wrap it up, there's all kinds of opportunities to discover prices, but you need to consider it in the context of what your overall marketing strategy is. And the first two speakers, I think, set a frame for how you would want to go about that, but recognizing that that frame only works when there's a good number popping in. And that number popping in is not always going to be way above costs. So the finish point is, until a producer knows their own costs, a lot of this is a moot discussion, right? So I'll stop there. Sorry if I went over time, but hopefully we can have some good discussion.
Okay, so in the essence of time, because we want to get to the discussions, we're going to skip the question part, because the questions were really just for clarification on any of the points in the presentation. And so what we'll do instead is, if you have questions, like requiring clarification on any of the points in the presentation, while you're in your groups having discussions, just put your hand up, and Steve and Bill and everybody will just sort of keep an eye, and the staff will kind of help, and Crystal will help just find the expert that you need at your table to guide the conversation. If that's helpful. And now I'll turn it back over to Crystal and to talk about the rest of the morning.
Awesome. So much great food for thought from the speakers, with lots of detail. I saw lots of people taking notes and lots of thinking, which is amazing. That's really important data to frame up how we build our map. So we are going to go to break, but you have an assignment to think about while you're on break. Because to be successful for goals, you need to picture yourself there. So if, for example, if you want to climb a mountain, say you're like, you know what, I want to climb a mountain. Okay, I've got this goal, I'm going to climb a mountain. You don't picture yourself in your current state, maybe sitting on the couch eating chips, watching Netflix, right? That's not very motivating. You know, you're like, well, here I am. I guess I need to be able to walk a kilometer and then start jogging, and then I need to hike a mountain, right? Like that's not good. That's not inspiring. So what professional athletes are trained to do is visualize the result. Visualize yourself on the top of the mountain. You are up there with your Canadian flag, right? You're doing your selfie. You're like, I did it. Do you see the difference? Couch, Netflix, here I am. I'm on the top of the mountain, right? So your assignment is, what is the news headline for October 30th, 2040? The news headline, your top of the mountain. Remember, we have this goal. And your headline, P.S., is not, Ontario sheep reaches 50%. Like you got to do better than that, okay? And be competitive. Like I want you to be jazzy. It's news, okay? It's not a boring key point, okay? It's a news headline, and you're going to do it as a table group. Okay, so over coffee, get some caffeine. I saw some Halloween treats. Get sugared up, get some coffee, and as a table group, when you come back, you're going to work on your news headline for 2040 and jazz it up because we're going to see who has the best news headline. All right, and we're going to take about 15 minutes for the break. So go.